أهلا ومرحبا بكم في برنامج داخل واشنطن. أنا مضيفكم روبرت ساتلوف. حتى قبل أن يؤدي اليمين الدستورية كان تركيز دونالد ترامب على السياسة الأمريكية في الشرق الأوسط وتهديده بأن أبواب الجحيم ستفتح إذا لم تتوصل حماس وإسرائيل إلى اتفاق لوقف إطلاق النار في غزة. كان ذلك سببا رئيسيا لتحقيق هذا الهدف في اليوم السابق لتنصيبه. ومنذ ذلك الحين تحدث الرئيس كثيرا عن الشرق الأوسط، من دعوة المملكة العربية السعودية إلى خفض أسعار النفط إلا مطالبة مصر والأردن باستقبال مليون لاجئ فلسطيني لإفساح المجال لإعادة الإعمار في غزة. ومع كل انشغالاته وأجندته المحلية الطويلة، لماذا كل هذا التركيز الكبير على الشرق الأوسط؟ وهل سيكون الرئيس ترامب رئيس سلام أم رئيس حرب في المنطقة؟ للحصول على نظرة ثاقبة لاتجاه المحتمل للسياسة الأمريكية في الشرق الأوسط خلال إدارة ترامب الثانية، يسعدني أن أرحب بالصديق والزميل ومسؤول رفيع المستوى في وزارة الخارجية، كان مسؤولا عن الشرق الأوسط في إدارة ترامب الأولى، مساعد وزير الخارجية السابق ديفيد شانكر. Welcome back to Dakhel, Washington. Love him or hate him, Donald Trump is a disruptor, especially in foreign policy. Greenland, Panama, Peru, Colombia, China, Canada, Mexico, now Gaza, upending the conventional wisdom on all these issues, and we're only a couple of weeks into Trump 47. Well, to help us understand Donald Trump's approach to foreign policy and the process of making foreign policy decisions, especially in the Middle East, I'm delighted to welcome my colleague and former Assistant Secretary of State for Near East Affairs, David Schenker. David, welcome to Dakhel, Washington.
It's good to be with you, Rob.
So you had a ringside seat to foreign policy making, especially Middle East policy making, in the first Trump administration. Let's talk about how this is shaping up for the second Trump administration. So I should say right at the beginning, welcome back. I know that you've been traveling in the region. You just flew back from Baghdad. I'm delighted that you could join us. Let's take a look back to Trump 1. In big picture terms, how were decisions made? What was the role of the Secretary of State, the National Security Advisor, Donald Trump's son-in-law, his friends? How did decisions get made?
Well, a little bit of chaos, constructive chaos at times, different power centers. Jared was somewhat of a free neutron, or doing his own business, mostly related to Israel and Saudi Arabia and the normalizations. You had Pompeo, who was really driving the foreign policy. He had a worldview that is, I think, a traditional Republican worldview, not what we'd call today necessarily MAGA. And then you had the White House and Trump himself, who every now and then would launch a tweet that would send us in another direction or perhaps take us off track. But by and large, this was a relatively normal administration as far as Trump goes. I think that is much different than what we're looking at right now.
When you look back on your time in government, on your time in the first Trump administration, what do you consider your greatest achievement?
Goodness, no home runs. I mean, the normalization with Morocco, I played a part in that. Maybe that was a home run, but a lot of singles and doubles. primarily keeping the train on the tracks, not having any wars. After we killed Soleimani, still a year later, we were in Iraq working on a productive relationship with this country. I mean, a lot of little things that, if they went wrong, would look like something like we had in the last administration.
So this echoes a bit of what the president said in his inaugural address, that he'll be known not for the wars he fought, but the wars he avoided.
You know, I think I count that as a big success in the last administration, the last Trump administration. Nothing went awfully wrong in that region.
And so you worked closely with then Secretary of State Pompeo. You say he was, or the secretary was a driving force in foreign policy in that administration.
Yeah, 100%. He had, I think for reasons unknown to him at the time, a very good relationship with the president. And he had a worldview that there is a place for the United States in the world, that our foreign policy should reflect our values, that we are, quote unquote, a force for good, was committed to the challenge of China, but also to our partnerships with key allies in the region.
And so let's jump now to how the second Trump administration looks, just in terms of structure, before we get to the substance. Similar, different from your experience in Trump 1?
No, I think it's different. This time around, I think Trump prepared. They staffed up. They had an idea of what they wanted to do. And as they move forward, they are ideologically vetting people for who comes in. So they want people who are committed to the MAGA agenda, 100% loyal, not necessarily to the Constitution, but to the president. And they're moving forward with their agenda right out of the box. I think last time, whether because there were this list of never Trumpers, that you lost a lot of the traditional Republicans who would serve a Republican president, but there was a team of rivals, let's say different ideological strains within the administration. Some people who wanted to be isolationists, but Pompeo and others who saw a role, a proactive American role in the world. And so I think there was more diversity of opinion last time around than there is now.
Was internal discussion, dissent, critical thinking encouraged in Trump 1?
Well, where I worked in the Pentagon, in the State Department, absolutely. You'd write Pompeo a memo, and when you went up to go see him on the 7th floor after you wrote it, if you're advocating for doing something for any reason, he'd ask you why we're doing this, and if you said we're doing it because we've always done it that way, it was the wrong answer. But yeah, you could come up with creative things that they'd be willing to try. Certainly, Pompeo. I think there's going to be less of that, but there were debates with the National Security Council that we had. Some people who were more toward the isolationist trend, or some people who wanted to ally with General Haftar, for example, in Libya, putting the United States in the same camp, not only as a dictator, but with Russia. And so, there was some back and forth, but I think here there's more unanimity of perspective. So
when you look at Donald Trump's approach to the Middle East today, what do you take away as his top priorities to achieve in this region?
Trump is about making deals, right? So he wants to get the normalization with Saudi. He wants to get back into a nuclear deal with Iran. And he wants to solve, to the degree that it's possible, the crisis in Gaza. I think those are the three priorities. Beyond that, advancing American economic interests in the region. But I think the priority for him is not the Middle East, notwithstanding that the priority, as it seems right now, is all about the Middle East. It's going to be Asia eventually. It's going to be tariffs. It's going to be domestic stuff, migration, throwing out immigrants, et cetera, illegal immigrants.
I mean, this actually gets at a tension that seems a bit surprising. The traditional MAGA instincts would say, don't get involved in the Middle East. Why it's a swamp. It's what sucked us into Iraq for 20 years and Afghanistan for 20 years. Stay away. But yet in his opening couple of weeks in office, there's quite a lot of engagement.
Yeah, it's remarkable. It's surprising. I think the Wall Street Journal had a piece on this today. Trump's all about disentangling U.S. commitments in the Middle East, not getting into wars, no more boots on the ground. And here he is saying, Gaza's ours, we're going to take it, and we're going to deploy troops there. It's a remarkable turn of events.
Actually, let me ask you, in Trump 1, did that sort of MAGA background political environment affect what you were doing in the State Department? Was it a constant cloud in which you operated, or was it always only in the background?
No, I think the one area where it was a challenge is wanting more engagement, and particularly, in Syria. This came to a head when Trump tried to more pushed for a withdrawal in 2018 from Syria, and really didn't want to have the U.S. involvement there, even for counter-ISIS work. He is very willing and happy to turn this over to the Turks. And I think this was pushed back from Pompeo and Jim Jeffrey and others who were the envoys for Syria that pushed against it to actually ended up keeping 800 or 850 troops there. So there was some of this disengagement. We shouldn't be there. Burden sharing, let other countries take the mantle or the work, invest their own blood and treasure. But we were able to, I think, make an argument that won the day during that first term. I don't think it's necessarily going to win the day in the second.
So it appears that current is more powerful today than it was when you were in the State Department.
Yeah, there is an ideological litmus test that is, I think, more rigorous in this administration than Trump one.
The new Secretary of State has already gone abroad, went to Panama, went to Central America. He has to deal with special envoys that seem to whittle away pieces of what are normally the responsibility of a Secretary of State. A special envoy for the Middle East, a special envoy for Ukraine, a special envoy for Venezuela, a special projects envoy. You had some of this back in your day. How does a Secretary of State deal with these special envoys?
Well, during Trump 1, the envoys answered directly to the secretary. I dealt with them. We coordinated back and forth with my Iran envoy, Brian Hook, with the Syria envoy, Jim Jeffrey. I was glad to have them. For the secretary, though, he is supervising them directly, and he can have up to 40 or 50 of these special envoys. Impossible to really supervise. In this case, most of the special envoys that we see so far are working out of the White House. So you've got Witkoff, his deputy Morgan Ortagus. You have Mossad Boulos, the president's relative. These are all out of the White House. And Witkoff has a close relationship with the president. I think he'll receive guidance. But, I don't know how the secretary is going to deal with that. It would be helpful if he has routine communication, if not command and control, at least knowledge of what they're doing.
All right, when we come back after the break, we're going to talk a little bit about the president's surprising approach to resolving the Gaza conflict, and we'll take a look at his approach to solving the Iran nuclear challenge, something that our guest has a lot of experience with since he was in government when the president brought us out of the Iran nuclear deal. We'll talk about all these issues with David Schenker in just a moment. Our guest today is David Schenker. David is the Taubey Senior Fellow and my colleague at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, where we're taping this show. He served in the first Trump administration as Assistant Secretary of State for Near Eastern Affairs, and he served in the Pentagon during the Bush years as Levant Country Director under Donald Rumsfeld. David was the DOD's top policy aide on the Arab world. An expert in Arab politics, David has authored dozens of op-eds and journal articles, plus the monograph Egypt's Enduring Challenges, published during the Arab uprisings of 2011. So, David, when you were in office, Donald Trump launched a Middle East peace plan. January 2020, the deal of the century to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It didn't succeed. What were the reverberations of that big initiative that failed?
Well, this was another one of Trump's disruptive approaches to the Middle East. But the disruption, I think, shook things up and created opportunities, right? And the primary opportunity was not peace with the Palestinians and the Israelis, but the normalization deals that came out of it. There was something clearly that could be traded away. That was Israeli annexation postponed in return for the normalizations with the Emirates, Bahrain, and then 2.5 more peace deals or normalization deals with both Morocco and Sudan, or 1.5 others. So I think it created opportunities. At the end of the day, this was a point of potential discussion, and it just wasn't ripe. I don't think the Palestinians were even interested in entertaining this document.
So the reason I bring this up is to ask whether we're in a similar situation now, a major Trump Middle East initiative which disrupts conventional wisdom. Should we look at it, namely the idea of America owning Gaza and relocating Palestinians? Should we look at it on its own merits? Should we look at it on the disruptive power it will have throughout the region? How should we understand this Trumpian initiative?
Yeah, I think this is a little more disruptive than people in the region were hoping. There is no doubt in my mind that given the opportunity, any number of Palestinians residing in Gaza would vote to leave Gaza, to look for a life of peace and more comfort and an opportunity elsewhere. But probably not the majority. And the bigger problem with the proposal is that both Jordan and Egypt, which would be responsible for taking in these refugees, have no interest in doing so. And the potential risk, if Trump pushes too hard on this, is that he will try and leverage foreign assistance, the peace treaties that have been so important, both Camp David and Wadi Arava with Jordan, could be at risk. And so I think this is more than, if he pushes forward with it, more than just a trial balloon. And worse, I think, for Trump, is if Saudi Arabia actually means what they say. This is not just Faisal bin Farhan, the foreign minister, but Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince. If they mean what they say, that they too don't accept this trial balloon, and Trump moves forward, he'll also lose the opportunity for a normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel. So I think the vision for peace, the deal of the century, was a piece of paper. This is an idea that Trump has repeated several times that he intends to pursue. And so in a way, I think it's more than potentially disruptive. it could be detrimental to long-term U.S. interests in the region.
Interesting. Do you expect Arab states to have a unified position of no, or do you expect them to come up with their own innovative approaches to appeal to Donald Trump in a different way?
Well, I do expect publicly for there to be an Arab summit where every one of the Arab states expresses its firm opposition to this. But I think privately, there will be Arab states, Jordan, Egypt, that come to proffer other ideas of what they can do to help. And this may be like the disruption of the deal of the century, or the vision for peace. Once again, an opportunity, to actually provoke or encourage more Arab forward-leaning approaches to Gaza, whether by putting in resources, putting in troops to help stabilize Gaza, putting in other resources, funding reconstruction. I don't know. I don't think that's what Trump's instinct is. I think he's actually doing this because he believes that this is the right thing to do to remove Palestinians from Gaza. But the fallback position will be to hopefully to get more Arab involvement in post-war Gaza.
Interesting. I mean, generally, when you look at the Middle East today, do you see it as a region of potential opportunity, or do you see it as a region that's radioactive, stay away as far as you can?
The last year, in many ways, was so horrific since October 7th. But starting really last year in September and October, when Israel devoted its attention to Hezbollah in Lebanon, I think what they did to Hezbollah, the reverberations for Syria, and whacking some pretty major targets in Yemen, in the Houthis, I think really changed entirely the dynamic in the region, put Iran on its back feet, set back the militias, undermined Iran's initiative in the region. No more Assad as an ally, no more top-tier militia, the A-team of terrorists in Lebanon. There's an opportunity for Lebanon to gain sovereignty if they embrace it for the first time in decades. There's an opportunity for Syria to exclude the Russians, to exclude the Iranians. There's an opportunity to push back on the militia in Iraq. But all of this is going to take U.S. engagement. And if we leave Syria, withdraw our troops and our diplomatic engagement in Iraq, we're going to squander an opportunity.
So opportunities are there.
Enormous.
Let's talk for a moment about the dark cloud that still hovers over part of the Middle East, and that's the Iranian nuclear challenge.
I think the original nuclear deal, this was the original sin, because it basically blessed enrichment. And once you do that for one country in the region, it's hard to keep all the other countries from doing so.
Thank you so much, David Shanker, for joining us, for offering insight from your experience in the Trump State Department, and for giving us a view about where we're likely to go in Trump 47 as we approach the Middle East. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
On داخل واشنطن. وبهذا تنتهي هذه الحلقة من برنامج داخل واشنطن. إن كانت لديكم أسئلة أو تعليقات حول هذه الحلقة، وخاصة حول احتمالات الحرب والسلام في الشرق الأوسط أثناء إدارة ترامب، أرجو التواصل معي عبر تويتر على هاشتاج Inside Washington أو مباشرة @RobSatloff. نلتقيكم في الأسبوع المقبل، وحتى ذلك الحين شكرا لكم وإلى اللقاء.